Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm continuing a series in which we're exploring the idea that God could have created the world with the appearance of age. It's called the apparent age argument, or creation with apparent age, or creation of a mature, or the mature creation viewpoint. We're here to continue to examine that. And this time, we're going to delve into a little bit of some of the historical responses to apparent age. We're going to look at young earth creationists and why they don't appeal to apparent age as one of their go-to arguments for explaining some of the observations of this world. We're going to talk about Gosse and the Ompholos. And what I've chosen for a title is this idea of essential versus deceptive creation with the appearance of age. This is a distinction that Henry Morris and a few other young earth creationists have tried to devise because everyone recognizes it's impossible to create something versus via fiat creation, like from nothing, without some appearance that the thing had existed before, right? Everything has the appearance of age. And so in denying apparent age creationism, but also accepting that anything created has the appearance of age, one has to come up with some sort of demarcation between correct apparent of age, apparent age that is okay, and apparent age that is not okay. And one of those terms that has been used is essential creation with age versus deceptive creation with age. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this in this particular episode as we continue to look at this concept. All right, so let's get after it. Essential versus deceptive creation with the appearance of age. Now, I need to explain what I'm doing here. This is a follow-up video from a more compact video I did called The False Hope of a Mature Creation. So if you haven't watched that, you might want to go watch that relatively short video. What we're going to do today is going to greatly expand upon that, and I'm going to dig into some things that a lot of people had comments on, like, you should have mentioned this, you should have said that, you should have done this. Well, yes, we're going to do all those things. Some in this particular video, but then in the subsequent videos they're going to come after this, we're going to explore some very specific sort of sub issues having involved in mature creation or the appearance of age. Now, this particular video is going to be me mostly reading a chapter from my unpublished book. So I have an extensive manuscript on the origin of the Hawaiian Islands and what that has to do with the age of the Earth. And you can see here's my preliminary cover page for that. The Hawaiian Islands and the Age of the Earth, a case study on creation science by me, Joel Duff. And in that particular manuscript, I discuss all the evidence for what the origin of the Hawaiian Islands are. I relate that to different theories of flood geology by young earth creationists. And then chapter 8 is a potential alternative explanation, a get out of jail free card for young earth creationists or other Christians to try to explain all the evidence away that the Hawaiian Islands are very old. And that is the apparent age argument. And so there is where I get to discuss, like, what is the apparent age argument? How would it apply to the Hawaiian Islands? And what's wrong with the apparent age argument? Why does no one really go for it, right? It's like no one really does make this argument for the Hawaiian Islands, but it's an instructive exercise to look at the Hawaiian Islands and ask, how would it work for a place like Hawaii, right? We're not really going to get too much to Hawaii today because I've realized that chapter is quite long and I'm going to have to divvy that up into a couple videos. But this first video contains the really important sort of foundational aspect of the whole question of apparent age. And that is, what are the arguments for apparent age and how have people used it in the past? So we're doing a little history of the apparent age argument. So let's dig into that chapter of my manuscript. And I'm asking a really fundamental question for the entire manuscript, which is, what is the origin of the Hawaiian Islands? Here's a place that exists on the earth, right? It's a physical place. And when you look at it, you say, like, it has to have an origin point. It had to have come from somewhere. And so how did it come? Is it just fiat creation? Something snapped their finger, God snapped his fingers, and there were the Hawaiian Islands. Or did it originate through a series of processes? right? Did it go through developmental stages to get to the point where it is today? And so I have many, many chapters about the actual physical aspects of the Hawaiian Islands and the types of data and observations we can gather from it and apply to it. And then how do young Earth creationists and how do old Earth creationists interpret that evidence? Great. What we're dealing with here now is, let's say that you accepted that the evidence looks like it's really old, but you wanted to maintain your belief that the world is very young, that it is literally not older than 10,000 years. How would you connect those two ideas together? How would you work that out in your mind? Apparent age is one possibility. The reality is that young Earth creationists universally prefer to account for all the geological features of the Earth, including the Hawaiian Islands, by appealing to creative events during the recent global flood or post-flood catastrophes. I have really never met a young Earth advocate who is well-read in creation science literature who believes that the Hawaiian Islands have their origins prior to the global flood, which is just 4,500 years ago. So even if you believe the world is 6,000 or 10,000 years old, I don't know any young Earth creationists who even believe it's that old. And so in this chapter, I'm asking, why is that? Why don't young Earth creationists reach for this idea of apparent age as sort of like this get out of jail free card, right? It's like, I can just explain away all the evidence with this mature creation thing. So one possibility is there's a perceived lack of causal agents for such origins during the time between the end of the creation week and the initiation of the flood. This is why they're like, where did the Hawaiian Islands come from between creation and the flood? There's really nothing recorded in scriptures about the creation and the flood that would suggest there's any dramatic changes to Earth's structure between those times. So what about the creation week itself? Well, couldn't God have just created the Hawaiian Islands when he created the heavens and the earth? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is a portion of the earth you have right before you here. Could he have not just created these islands? Now, I just said, I haven't met anyone who's either a young Earth apologist or well-versed in the creationist literature who believes that the Hawaiian Islands are formed during the creation week. But I do encounter non-scientists who haven't explored the creationist literature or secular literature, including many pastors I've heard from the pulpit, who are really eager to point to events in the creation week to explain the origins of many of the Earth's geological features and other features of creation, such as the physical appearance of the moon and other planets, which we're going to talk about in other videos. Their appeal to fiat creation by God in the space of just 6 days is often, like, I think it's a reflexive response to what they perceive as overwhelming evidence that the Hawaiian Islands are really old. You go to the islands, you look at them, and it doesn't take a lot of knowledge of geology to kind of like get this perception like, these things are kind of old. You know, and in my chapter, all right, in previous chapters of my manuscript, I explored extensive evidence, including radiometric dating, coral reef growth rates, paleomagnetism, tectonic plate motions, erosion of volcanoes, subsidence of the islands. Those all appear to form a really strong case that there's an ancient history to the Hawaiian Islands. Now, for Christians who feel like a literalistic reading of Scripture demands a recent creation of the Hawaiian Islands, a convenient response to this evidence of an ancient age could be to just straight up appeal to creation with the appearance of age. And what is that? In a nutshell, creation with appearance of age is the belief that God may have created physical objects during the creation week, which, upon inspection, have the appearance of being much older than they actually are. The simplest proof of concept involves the appeal to the creation of Adam, who was created as an adult, who would have had the appearance of having a history of growth, right, and development. But that growth and development wouldn't have been a real history. Now, if we took the logical extension of this, we could propose that things like tree rings, like you see right here, or craters on the surface of the moon, or maybe the starlight that comes from this nebula, maybe all those are endowed with information, right? Like this, the light coming to us from way far away includes the information about this massive explosion. It seems to have been like, if this is creation with the appearance of age, it appears to tell a story, right? It appears to tell us an ancient history. But is it nothing more than just the appearance of history and not actually true history? That's the question we're dealing with here. All right, this isn't a new idea. An appeal to creation with apparent age has been a common defense of creationism in the past, especially among natural theologians of the 19th century. Appeals to apparent age creation were common at that time, but they've lost favor among Christian theologians and scientists in the 20th century. Now, as I indicated before, there's a lot of Christians who are not scientists and not up on like what creation scientists believe, that find apparent age creation really appealing and kind of intuitive, and therefore it's still, at play in a large part in common, discussions. I see it all the time on Facebook and Twitter. I see appeals to apparent age crop up in comment sections very frequently still. Its appeal is really obvious. To someone not versed in science, navigating this really complex world of scientific evidence, sometimes complicated biblical evidence, it seems just a lot simpler to just ask the question, hey, why couldn't God have just created the Hawaiian Islands like we see them today? Maybe he just created the Grand Canyon. He created the mountains. He created, all the different aspects of things that we find are really remarkable and amazing about this earth. So many Christians wonder, why not just push the Hawaiian Islands? Just push them all the way back, way back into the 6-day creation week, like on day 3, the separation of the land from the waters. Rather than trying to find some sort of convoluted explanation for their formation, which seems to be solely based on natural mechanisms. And I'm talking about old earth creationist and young earth creationist, both of whom are looking for natural mechanisms. They're not invoking miracles. All right, so we need to step back and we're going to answer some of these questions now, right? We're going to examine the history of apparent age creationism and see what creation scientists and theologians have to say about this. If we consider the fiat creation of Hawaiian Islands during the creation week, presumably on day 3, as I said before, there's 2 possible Hawaiian Islands that God could have formed, right? First, the Hawaiian Islands could have been created with the appearance of great age, including the appearance of age progression among the islands. And by that, I mean that one island looks older than another, right? It looks like a progressive series of islands in which one island seems to have been around longer than another island. Right? So that is clearly the appearance that there is a history there. Second, the Hawaiian Islands could have been created during the creation week, but were created to appear young, like less than 10,000 years old. I mean, that's another possibility. We might call this the superficial creation, after the definition of Henry Morse that we're going to look at in a moment. This is superficially, it looks old. However, this latter scenario appears to have never been taken seriously by any Christian scholars, probably because they don't really appear to be young, right? So other than Ken Ham and others insist that every geological feature on Earth looks young because they actually are young, right? Because he's gonna insist that the Hawaiian Islands are less than 4,500 years old because they formed after the flood because they have no flood deposits on them, right? They're all just volcanic. And therefore they are less than 4,500 years. Therefore they are young. And in his mind, they look young. They have to look young. They cannot look old because they are actually just 4,500 years old. And you simply need to rearrange the way you think as you look at them to have them look young in your mind. All right, so we're just really going to be dealing with that idea of why couldn't God just have created them to look old, to look like they have a history right there from the very beginning. Now, while some form of appeal to apparent age in creation can be traced all the way back to the church fathers, I think the modern expression, and I would say the fullest articulation of the argument for apparent age, can be found in the book Ompholos, an attempt to untie the geological knot by Henry Gosse in 1857. As the title suggests, the book attempts to present an argument for how old Earth geology, which had become very prominent, it had become a prominent geological view at the time, could be made compatible with the views of scriptural geology. In his book, Gosse proposed that the history of all things is circular, and that creation was simply the act of God's breaking into the cycle at some particular point in the cycle, and then bringing all things into being wherever they might be in that cycle. While nothing physically existed before that point, the subsequent objects brought forth would have the appearance of a complete history that had gone on before them, determined by whatever part of the natural cycle that they had entered into. I think of it like a life cycle. We think about like we can design how an organism goes through a life cycle of reproduction. And then you say, like, if I created any point in that particular life cycle, I'm creating it with the appearance that it came from prior points in that life circle, right? That life cycle. But let me use Bernard Ramm. In his book, The Christian View of Science and Scripture, he really, I think, tries to describe Gosse's view, which is kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around. And so I'm having trouble describing it. So let me use his words to describe this thing. So Pronic, or ideal time view, the ideal time view. In 1857, Philip Henry Gosse published Ompholos, an attempt to untie the geological knot. Gosse was a man learned in natural history and not a simpleton nor an armchair speculator. He argued that nature was a circular process and therefore creation must commence somewhere in the cycle. A building may be commenced from scratch at the foundation, but a building does not have a cyclical existence. You cannot create an organism from scratch because all organic life exists as a cycle. Creation must start somewhere in the cycle, and hence the created life would appear as if it had already gone through the cycle up to that point where it was created. Gosse lists as two fundamental theses that all organic life moves in a cycle and that the creation is a violent eruption into the cycle of nature. He asked what creation is and answers his own question. Creation is the sudden bursting into a circle. Since there is no one state in the course of existence which more than any other affords natural commencing point, whatever stage selected by the arbitrary will of God must be an unnatural, or rather a preternatural commencing point. Ompholos is the Greek word for navel. Did Adam have a navel? Of course he did, argues Gosse. He was created at a given point in the circle of life, and therefore he was created as if he had gone through that entire cycle. Goes on to say, he goes on to point out that every object of creation has two times. That which is before time, or instantaneous and coming into existence, is prochronic. And that which consumes time is dichronic. All processes during the course of which the world since the creation are dichronic. All things at the moment of creation were prochronic. Gosse also uses the term real time and ideal time. At the moment of creation, Adam's real time was 0. Actually, he did not exist till the moment of creation. His ideal time was, say for the purposes of illustration, 30 years old. A tree in the Garden of Eden would appear 50 years old. That's its ideal age, whereas it had just been created. That's its real time. How does this apply to geology? It means that the real times of the universe might be 6,000 or 10,000 BC, whereas the ideal time might be in millions of years. Fossils and geological processes refer then to the ideal or prochronic time, not to real time or historical time. And I'll say, put it another way, Gosse proposes that the initial products of God's creation must display the traces of previous stages of the circle, whether those previous stages had any real existence or not. Really interestingly, for Gosse, this requires that the present becomes the key to the past in interpreting these apparent histories. This is because to understand the apparent history that God created within all things, we must be able to study and understand historical cycles of all physical objects right here in the present. So in essence, Gosse, even if not acknowledging it explicitly, was arguing that the conclusions of geology of his day, suggesting the earth was old, were actually correct, except that they did not recognize that God had created the earth out of a moment in the planetary life cycle. A Gossean argument for the origin of the Hawaiian Islands and the presence of tectonic plate motions might be that the Hawaiian Islands and the ocean plates they sit on are part of a cycle of plate motions and mountain formations that are in ideal time that last for millions of years, but in real time were made less than 10,000 years ago. This explanation allows for estimates of plate motions to have occurred over millions of years in the past ideal time, at the same rates as we measure in the actual real time today. The Hawaiian Islands are simply an extension of an entire global process of plate motion and magma upwelling through the ocean plates to form islands over periods of millions of years in ideal time years. So the geological processes of the past, ideal time, would have been the same as those that we see in the continuation of these cycles now here today in real time. Hence, it wouldn't be expected within the Gaussian apparent age view that measurements of age and reconstructions of historical events would yield the same results of modern geological models that found in hundreds of publications in science journals. At first glance, the appearance of age argument might appear to permit a person to recognize most of the findings of modern geology and yet still believe in the physical origin of the Earth was very recent. This argument then singularly eliminates the need for many contrived theories of flood geology to explain the origin of all the geological features of the Earth within the space of 10,000 years. If this apparent age argument has merit, then why isn't it widely held within the community of creation scientists seeking to bring science and scripture together? Creation scientists believe almost universally that the scriptures require that death of animals was the direct result of Adam's sin. They view the original creation as wholly perfect and thus fundamentally different than this present world. As a result, they reason that any evidence of death in the world must be the result of the activity of Adam's creation, after Adam's creation and fall. Furthermore, since Adam was created on the sixth day and fell into sin sometime after that, they believe it's impossible to assign any of the geological features of the Earth that contain fossils to any point during the creation week. This is because they accept the theory that fossils represent the remnants of actually formerly living things in real time, not ideal time. Right? And therefore, they can't represent part of the original creation. Since almost all mountains today have fossils contained in them, it is argued that God could not have created the Hawaiian Islands or practically any other geological feature on the face of the Earth today in the original creation week. Now, of course, Gosse didn't really have a problem with that because he believed that even fossils were part of the pattern of cycles. And therefore, when God broke into that in creation, he would have created the world with fossils in it to represent that ideal time. So creation scientists, they just can't concur with Gosse's model of apparent age by positing that the Hawaiian Islands creation is pre-cryonic, right, before time. Suggests to most creation scientists that God had somehow imagined a world that was containing many cycles of death prior to the literal physical creation. And this, in their minds, conflicts with the interpretation of a deathless world prior to the fall. So if he's going to break into a world, a cycle, it's a cycle of perfection, which doesn't include death. So how could you create something that looks like it has death in it, is essentially their argument. Could God have created a world in which many features had the appearance of age? It is certainly within God's power and liberty to have created such a way. To some extent, no object could be created without the appearance of having a prior history. However, some theologians have objected to the appeal to apparent age by preferring, if it's used at all, that it be restricted to just a really small set of special cases. Dr. Douglas Kelly, in his 1997 book, Creation and Change, Genesis in the Light of Changing Scientific Paradigms, he defends a literal six-day creation. And though he appeals to appearance of age in a few special cases, he draws back from its widespread use with the following argument. In a footnote to the discussion of the apparent age, he makes these comments. In the nature of the case, there are certain limits to this. It is one thing to realize that Adam was created full grown, but quite another to hypothesize that distant stars were created with a pathway of light shining all the way to Earth, perhaps indicating the historical explosion of supernovae, which according to this theory never actually happened. The former follows a sensible reading of Genesis, the latter does not. The dilemma of old light is very similar to what we observe with the geological features of the Earth. In both, we can readily infer a specific sequence of what appears to be historical events, just as we can see a bullet hole at a crime scene and infer that a bullet had passed, right, through that point at some point in the past. However, this apparent ancient history of the Earth is not the history that creation scientists believe the scriptures are revealing. Rather than appeal to apparent age to explain why the Earth looks old, like why Adam looked old when he was created, they are convinced the Earth looks neither old nor really is old, and thus any interpretation of great age is questioned. and they seek ways to conform the data to an interpretation that assumes that all historical events are contained within a 6,000-year history. As I said before, Ken Ham insists the Hawaiian Islands look young. And if you think they look old, you need to rearrange your interpretation of that data in order to have it actually be young and look young to you. Young Earth creationists just persist in resisting the use of apparent age as an explanation for the great age of the Earth, or the observed great age of the Earth. And what are their primary reasons? 2 reasons why not a mature creation. Number 1, it is not the character of God to deliberately deceive man by creating false histories about himself and the world around him. Both the evidence of death in the presumably created record as well as evidence of the evolutionary history of organisms result in a fantasy past that is neither intellectually satisfying nor biblically defended. All right, and then number 2, the appearance of age argument is used primarily by those convinced the Earth is young but who wish to avoid confrontation with the scientific data. However, it doesn't even fulfill this purpose, as we're going to see. By placing many geological features in the creation week, the question is begged, where exactly does the global flood then fit into apparent age? The first difficulty stems from the impression that if God created with the appearance of age, he would be unnecessarily deceptive. Creation scientists find themselves at odds with each other with respect to how far to employ, like how far should they push this idea of apparent age. Earlier, we just noted that Douglas Kelly doesn't find the incorporation of the history of Starlight to be a very sensible reading of Scripture. However, both Henry Morris and his son John Morris were willing to employ this explanation for a wide variety of phenomena, including the presence of ancient starlight that contains information about past events that literally did not happen. In response to the question, did God create with the appearance of age? John Morris writes, son of Henry Morris of the Genesis flood fame. Simply stated, the idea of creation with the appearance of age means that when God created, those things which he created might superficially have looked as if they had a history. When Adam was created, he no doubt looked like a mature adult, fully able to walk, talk, care for the garden, etc. When God created fruit trees, they were already bearing fruit. In each case, what he created was functionally complete right from the start. That sounds a little Gossian right there. Able to fulfill the purpose for which it was created. Again, that's a Gossian concept, right? Breaking into the cycle of this, and now your purpose is to continue on that trajectory. Stars created on day 4 had to be seen to perform their purpose or usefulness in telling time. Therefore, their light had to be visible on Earth right from the start. The scientists would rely on today's human growth rates, or rates of radioactive decay, or the speed of light, and calculate how long it would take for the state of maturity to develop, and would come to a wrong conclusion. Why do they come to a wrong conclusion? Because they're extrapolating from the present into the past based on the appearance of that light having traveled that far. But he's going to suggest that that light was just created in transit, and therefore we come to the wrong conclusion that it looks old when it actually is young. Well, but it is created with the appearance of age, so therefore it does appear to be old. But to say that it actually is old would be wrong in his mind. This is because the world today is not as it was in creation. God's creative powers are at rest now, and he is maintaining the creation using present laws of physics. He could do whatever he wanted in creation, he's saying. Like, he could create the light in transit all the way there with a story even in contained in that light. There's a supernova in the light's beam, except the supernova actually never happened. The original created world, perfect and non-decaying at first, was subsequently cursed and made subject to decay and death. Furthermore, even that world was destroyed by the flood of Noah, so that we live in a world today that is a relict of destructive processes, not a creative process. Any effort to apply present processes and process rates to creation is doomed to failure. So here Morris is advocating that starlight would have been visible right from the beginning, no matter what the distance of the source was. It might seem like Morris is more willing to appeal to apparent age than Kelly, but Morris includes an important qualifying word, and that is the word superficially. right, superficially insinuates that there was only a general appearance of age built into the original creation. Any light that was shining on earth would necessarily have appeared to have had its source as the sun. To use the term superficially, though, is a way of suggesting that the sunlight would have filled its necessary role as an indicator of daylight, but that the light would not be endowed with like specific historical information that would suggest past events that didn't pertain directly to its specific purpose. It's likely, therefore, that Morse and others would not expect to find specific information contained in that original light, such as the evidence of a supernova explosion, that points to some past event that doesn't really serve any original purpose today. And so it's just generic light coming from a generic sun, not telling a history of like specific events that break out of the norm of like the perfect creation. An average sort of bland creation in which everything is acting in sort of a standard way. That's superficial creation of apparent age. But let's continue, all right, with that quote. It goes on a little bit further in that particular article. God in his sovereignty knew that fallen man living in the post-flood world might wrongly conclude the age and origin of things. For just that reason, he gave us a clear record of what he had done and when he had done it. Right? He's saying, God knew Adam would fall and corrupt the world, and then that corrupt thinking would lead to wrong conclusions about the age and origin of things. Do we get the wrong ideas? Then we would contort the data that we're looking at. And therefore, he gave us a record and told Adam about the creation, and that he communicated in Genesis exactly what happened, right, about the physical creation. Furthermore, when we look at the evidence in light of what he has told us, the universe doesn't even look old. See, this is just like what Ken Ham is trying to do. It doesn't actually look old. The real evidence is fully compatible with an origin only thousands of years ago. On the other hand, if fallen scientists extrapolating present processes are right, and the universe is old, then God has lied to us. For he clearly said he created all things in 6 days, not too long ago. I don't know where the not too long ago part comes in the Bible because I don't remember that there, but you get the idea. He thinks that the Bible is clearly indicating that God created things in 6 days and there was nothing before that 6 days. All right, now I don't know if you're confused like I am. This is confusing stuff. The light has superficial appearance of, because it is created in transit to us because that's necessary. But we're still not allowed to extrapolate into the past. Like we were supposed to know from scriptures that isn't old. So it's not fair to actually look at that light and actually extrapolate back, like how far back that looks like it is. It looks like it's 500,000 light years away, based on calculations of the distance to that star and our knowledge of the speed of light. Can't do that. If you do that, then you come to the wrong conclusion. But somehow we're supposed to still look at it and see that it looks young. The only way you can do that is if you presuppose that it's young, and then you just tell yourself it is young. So now I look at it and go like, oh, that's young starlight. That's young light. That's a young universe out there. So if starlight were to have information that suggested a specific history then of events that had never occurred, the response to that data is not necessary to conclude that God didn't create the light with that data. Rather, it's necessary to look at the evidence in another way such that it can be reinterpreted in light of the clear record of scriptures. So in the context of this presupposition of truth of a young universe, the evidence should be compatible with that view. It's impossible then to say that Morse really draws the line between things such as light that is created with apparent age and those things, such as the evidence contained in the light, that are being incorrectly, in his mind, interpreted as suggesting an old age universe. Where is the line drawn? How do you know where to find the line between what's created with apparent age and what is real history? That's always the conundrum with the apparent age argument. How do you know? Other creation scientists have taken a much more vigorous stance in rejecting apparent age arguments. For example, here's Don Batten in 2000 writing for Answers in Genesis. And this is one of the answers in the Answers book, right? The Revised and Expanded Answers book from 2000. And there he states this: Perhaps the most commonly used explanation is that God created light on its way, so that Adam could see the stars immediately without having to wait years for the light from even the closest ones to reach the earth. While we should not limit the power of God, this has some rather immense difficulties. It would mean that whenever we look at the behavior of a very distant object, what we see happening never really happened at all. For instance, say we see an object a million light years away, which appears to be rotating. That is, the light we receive on our telescope carries the information recording this behavior of rotation. However, according to this explanation, the light we're now receiving did not come from the star, but was created en route, so to speak. This would mean that for a 10,000-year-old universe, that anything we see happening beyond 10,000 light years away is actually part of a gigantic picture show of things that would not actually happen, showing us objects which might not have ever existed. To create such a detailed series of signals in light beams reaching Earth, signals which seem to have come from a series of real events, but in fact did not, has no conceivable purpose. Worse, it's like saying that God created fossils and rocks to fool us or even test our faith, and that we don't represent anything, and that they don't represent anything real, a real animal or plant that lived and died in the past. This would be a strange deception. I think Don Batten captures the essence of what most people's reaction is to the apparent age argument. That's not a real history. There's a painted fantasy world out there that we're being led to believe is real but isn't. So it appears that Don Batten believes that light or any other object of study that exhibits clear evidence of having a past history. In other words, if you study something and it looks like it has a past history that goes beyond 10,000 years, then that's not completely faithful to the original condition of the created world, right? One that's free of decay and death. So therefore, it must have originated after the fall of Adam. I mean, a supernova explosion, in their minds, that can't happen in the original perfect creation. God wouldn't have created a star that would explode, right? So therefore, seeing an explosion in light means it's something that had to have happened after Adam sinned. So it has to be less than 6,000 years old. The use of the phrase "no conceivable purpose" is very similar to the sentiment that Morris expressed when he used his term superficially. Both words suggest as long as the objects such as light were filling an essential purpose at the time of creation, then the apparent age of that light would not be unexpected nor violate the character of God. Any other information that might be conveyed by light beyond its original intent would be considered like some kind of strange deception. For Batten and colleagues, this obvious information that can be learned about supernova contained in some light goes beyond the expected purpose of light in the original creation, and therefore it must have emanated at some point after the creation was altered by man's sin, thus allowing for supernova to occur. For creationists, therefore, all data suggestive of great age must be reinterpreted to fit within this paradigm. Both of these descriptions of the apparent age rely on the sense of purpose to define what is essential appearance of age versus what would be deceptive appearance of age. All right, so somehow we have to define the purpose of things in order to understand what is superficial versus wrong apparent age. But how might essential and deceptive appearance of age be distinguished? What criteria do I use to tell the difference between the two? Let's take the example of Adam. Most creation scientists, they defend what they call the perfect paradise model, right? That's an interpretation of the created state of the world that understands that Adam was created without any blemishes, that no organisms had blemishes, there was no death, right? As a new creation, Adam would have the appearance, based on common experience, of having biological parents. That would be I guess you call the superficial appearance. Like that's just the normal action that we would expect, that any person would have parents. However, it might be argued that specific characteristics of those parents and specific events that happened to him during his childhood would not be possible to reconstruct, right? Looks like he's 30 years old, and it looks like he had parents. He has a belly button. But I can't just look at Adam and understand events that happened to him specifically in his childhood. right? It would just look like he's generically old. There's generic, like, tree rings in the trees. But those tree rings wouldn't have had, like, something that I could easily look at and interpret as, oh, there was a fire during this year because I see a burnt layer, amongst these tree rings. So in this way, I guess we could say Adam is superficially, or we'll use the word essentially, right, would have apparent age. However, what if Adam had been created by God with little indentations in his arm that identically matched the dental pattern of a coyote that was missing a left incisor? Right? I was like, over there in the garden, there's some coyotes. Adam's going to name all the animals, right? He's naming these coyotes, and the coyote smiles, and we see it's missing one of its teeth. Adam has this pattern on his arm in which he's got bite marks that look like a bite from an animal, but there's actually a pattern that suggests that one of the teeth was missing. And maybe I even, the coyote's a friendly coyote because, they wouldn't be aggressive in the garden. And you go up to it and you say, like, you know what, that thing looks like it would fit in your arm. And you go up to the coyote, you open your mouth, and you clamp onto my arm. Look at that. It's an exact match. The bite mark on my arm is an exact match for that. But I was just created this morning, and I don't remember being bit by that animal. Might not that evidence be interpreted as revealing an apparent history with no conceivable purpose? What would be the purpose of having him look like he had a history of being bit by an animal in the past? Of course, the creation scientist is going to respond that this is just a hypothetical example. And then, in fact, Adam didn't have any such scars, right? He had a generic belly button. But the example does illustrate that defining how to apply the apparent age, the appearance of age as an explanatory tool can become really difficult really quick. In the hypothetical alone, the indentations on Adam's arm and the coyote with a missing left incisor they're just observations. It's the interpretation of the data that results in the problem. Morris has suggested a solution. All right, he concludes that all the evidence, when seen in the proper light, will be consistent with a young earth. All evidence from this physical world, if you just look at it with the right worldview glasses on, you will be able to see everything as being proof of a young world. As a result, Morris could respond to this observation above that we just made, which we're going to call a fact or a piece of evidence. And he could say that the indentation did not come from the wolf. Rather, what appeared to be bite marks on his arms are actually small indentations that God made, he designed on Adam's arm for the purpose of allowing Adam to place, while he was naked and didn't have any clothes with pockets, a place to store berries that he had collected in the garden while he's climbing up a tree. Look, I got these little indentations on my arm, and this is where I place my berries. So these marks are given a purpose, right, by the designers. They become an integral part of creation and a helper, something that helps Adam in his daily life. The coyote, then what do we do with the coyote with the missing left incisor and the fact that it looks like it has the same pattern as Adam's arm? Well, then it can just be dismissed as a coincidence. By doing this, Morris would be able to redefine the evidence such that it makes sense in light of his presuppositions. The conundrum of the evidence for the antiquity of the earth or even other planets over against the fear of making God a deceptive creator, that's most often been handled by creation scientists as demonstrated above. Right? Many creation scientists are reluctant to insert old light or the Hawaiian Islands into the original creation for fear of making God appear deceptive. As a result, their only recourse is to question the standard and well-accepted interpretation of the evidence itself, right? Rather than radiometric dates as the product of creation or apparent age and therefore accurate interpretations of the measurements of radionuclides in the created earth, they're compelled to question the validity of the dates and require that all data be reinterpreted within 10,000 years or 6,000 years. The creation science literature is just replete with examples of attempts to demonstrate how data can be reinterpreted within a young earth paradigm. However, there's a large number of scientifically illiterate Christians seeking answers to how to interpret the world from a young earth perspective that still find this apparent age explanation a convenient explanation, allowing them to avoid the difficult task of working through the complexities of these scientific models. The example of the coyote and the marks on Adam's arm illustrates how the same evidence could be interpreted in two different manners to completely different effects. However, while the marks on Adam's arms might be satisfactorily placed into a more comforting context, the lack of explanation for the apparent coincidental data, right, the correlation of the marks on Adam's arm and the dental problems of that garden wolf, that coincidental data of Adam should be a warning that all the evidence is not so easily dispatched. The volume of evidence that has resulted from studies of light, radioactive elements, the Hawaiian Islands, and the ease with which that evidence can be interpreted within modern plate tectonics and atomic theory, all of that suggests that such simple reinterpretations of the data are unlikely to be successful or satisfying. The coincidence of the coyote in the garden with the same tooth pattern as the indentations on Adam's arm might be easy to ignore, but the plethora of coincidences, we'll say correlated data, observed in numerous studies of the Hawaiian Islands and the Earth's plate tectonics is just not easily dismissed, though it might be convenient to ignore. So what I'm going to do next is we're going to turn to the Hawaiian Islands, and I'm going to present a much more detailed, specific look at the evidence that suggests that the Hawaiian Islands are ancient and what one would have to do to accommodate that particular evidence within an apparent age viewpoint. And that's going to help maybe create the contrast between essential age versus deceptive age. Essential age being what age has to be there. Jesus makes water into wine. And if I were to take a look at that wine, it looks like it was created through some process, right? I would think that it has an appearance of being older than it actually is, being instantaneously old. And so somebody would say like that's essential age. But is it deceptive age? The definitions of those two things are rather murky. And I feel like these terms have only been created just to make it sound like there's a distinction, like it's okay to believe this, but not okay to believe that God would create with deceptive age. But actually defining it is a much more difficult thing to do. And so we'll make a stab at looking at what is deceptive age when we look at the Hawaiian Islands and maybe like craters on Mars and other situations. So that's what I've got coming up next, is a continuation of what I have written in this chapter of my book on the Hawaiian Islands and how it relates to creation science. So I've got that coming up next. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening.